His light began to reflect off rusted metal, and he found himself in the burial mound of countless cars. He slowly moved through this ancient graveyard of metal with the sound of heavy leaves crunching underfoot. The cars he found were ranging from models of the 1950s to modern day, possibly earlier. He looked into a rusted Stingray that was so old and subsumed by time its color was nothing more than rust brown. Frank saw a skeletal man slumped over the driver's seat. Blue Eyes whirled his light around with caution when he heard the sounds of leaves rustling pick up. He turned to go back the way he came until he saw Lawford face down in a pile of leaves. His duffel was open and the wind slowly took the money and showered it amongst nature's canopy. Frank moved towards Lawford. "Hey Lawford, you alive?" Frank yelled out. There was no response. He moved in close and nudged the man with his gun muzzle. There was nothing. Frank wasn't all that broken up, but he didn't want it to go down like that. He flipped Lawford over with one hand, not to check if he was alive, but to get the strap from his duffel. The wind erupted, and Frank was pushed back. The pile was disturbed by the sudden blast. Leaves and bills mingled together in an unholy vortex of fury. Frank began firing into the anomaly, not knowing if it were alive, but making sure it would certainly be dead if it was. Leaves began to mold into something. Shape and form gave way to substance and symmetry. The pile of leaves and money became a mass that had something resembling arms and legs, but served as an abstraction to a natural being, possibly even a mockery of one. Frank sent bullets into the creature that was slowly growing and growing until it was 3 times his size. When Frank's chamber popped empty, he stared at the large sum of money that managed to form a portion of his body and chose to reload, overrun. Bishop howled in pain even though he grit his teeth to soldier past his threshold. He housed a look of fear as if he knew what was coming and his temporary agony was the payment for his life. Sammy moved at a snail's pace. He drugged Bishop plus his duffel and was unwilling to part with either. As far as he was concerned, his money was as crucial a member of the crew as anyone else. The 2 criminals heard shots raging against the unbridled darkness in the far-flung distance, though not far enough away that they could relax and write it off. "What the fuck did you see out there?" Sammy whispered to Bishop. He tried to answer, but speaking in complete sentences was hard for him when his bones were slowly breaking after the slightest movement. Sammy had to just piece it together through context clues, because he was pretty sure stopping and letting whatever he thought it was catch up was not the most favorable course. From what Sammy could make out, Bishop went on about leaves being alive. He had seen the way the winds all but assaulted the vehicle, so he could see why Bishop could make that claim. But also, he was beaten, clinging on to life, and people said all kinds of wild shit when they were on the cusp. After several minutes of trudging through the dark, feeling his way back to the road on memory, Sammy and Bishop heard the winds rustling. "Let me go and run," said Bishop. When a thief showed a cause for alarm and made mention of leaving them, they absolutely knew they weren't going to make it out alive. Though Sammy was a typical thief, he was a daredevil first before he was anything. So for him, destructive self-interest was only a thing he practiced when the mask went on, not his typical state. He dropped his duffel and hoisted Bishop up in a fireman's shoulder carry. The money would be there when he returned. Bishop groaned out of reflexive pain, but he didn't belabor the point. They managed to find their way back to the old dirt road with only the weak light of the phone. The rustling grew stronger. The 2 strained their eyes to see, trying to make sense of abstracted shapes they found in the darkness. With what the 2 thought was a tree, moved at a distance 100 paces from them. But it wasn't a tree. It was the leaves themselves stepping forth onto the road in a movement that could loosely be called human-like. Its head, if you could call it that, crested over the darkened canopy. Sammy ran with Bishop over his shoulders down the dirt road. The creature wasn't fast, but what it lacked in speed, it made up for with size. 2 steps were 10 steps versus Sammy. The leaves were wind and will, something held together with a power he couldn't comprehend. Its long, distended mass of green reached out as a man might, but fell away into a pile when it missed its mark rather than draw its arm back. Sammy was feeling his weight and Bishop's dragging them down. The part of Sammy that was decent didn't want to leave Bishop, but the primal part of him needed to live. Bishop screamed and his bones rippled from being dropped. The wind killed the sound abruptly as the living leaves stepped on Bishop. Once the limb raised up, he was nowhere to be found. Sammy cut into the deeper forest and watched the whipping winds deconstruct and reconstruct the mammoth monster so that it could adapt to the various random shapes nature created. Sammy ran aimlessly, tripping as much as he was moving. His feet skidded to a halt and he grabbed the thinnest of tree limbs. Sammy looked down and saw his doom in the form of a 200-foot drop. Sammy ran along the edges, nearly slipping several times. The beast weaved its way through the canopy with methodical, effortless grace. Sammy stopped after tripping over something big. He spared a moment and flashed his cell phone down onto a corpse that was dried bones. He wore a curious backpack that he didn't have time to inspect before the beast pushed its way in front of him. The massive creature cut off his momentum, and there was nowhere left to go but over the side or through it. Direct moonlight shone on the creature, and though its contours were mostly a mystery, Sammy saw its insides roiling with life. Born of will and wind, and churning with whatever discarded dead forms of life the forest provided, it took a half a heartbeat to consider the masked daredevil. He saw Bishop's broken body churning inside of it along with blood and money. Before Sammy could stop to contemplate what it meant, the abomination reached out to him. Sammy rolled, landing on top of the old corpse, crushing his frame and turning it into human puzzle pieces. He grabbed the pack that was on its back. The beast let go of his form completely, opting to crash down on him like a living wave of leaves. Sammy jumped. He was prepared to face his doom if it was his time. He pulled the ripcord. The corpse he found wore a packed parachute, or at least he hoped it was. He didn't have time to check it or secure it properly. He gasped with anticipation when he pulled the string. The chute deployed. He breathed a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. Sammy looked up to see the leaves pouring off the side, furiously gliding down after him. The beast lost its form and became a mass of the decomposed matter of the forest. Suddenly, a gust of wind seemed to spit a broken body at Sammy. Sammy saw what looked to be old Blue Eyes ejected and flung at him. The broken corpse missed and cracked over the night canopy. Lawford's body fell out of the massive creature's orbit. The further it moved, the more of itself it lost. Leaves and money fell like snowflakes from heaven, and when Sammy managed to get close to the ground and crested the treetops, there was nothing left of the beast. Sammy was consumed by the forest when he landed, and through luck, managed not to hit a branch. He nimbly touched down and attempted to find his way back to Dean Martin's house. He decided to ignore the money raining down on him and considered that an offering to the beast, whatever it was. After some time of fumbling in the dark, Sammy managed to reacquire the road back to Dean's house. He saw the house in view and smiled. If he was lucky, maybe he could get a ride back. As he entered the clearing, he stepped on something in the loose gravel. It made an ominous click. A boom happened. Sammy was thrown 50 feet back into the woods from the impact. The lights of the house flared to life, and Dean rushed out with an assault rifle and full body armor, turtled up as if going to battle. He charged into the brush and found Sammy bleeding out fast. He had lost an arm, a leg, and was in an ocean of blood and bits. Sammy made a groan and reached out with his left hand, but Dean let his rifle sink. He shot Sammy several times. Dean hoped it didn't come to this. He had truly hoped, but this wasn't the first time people doubled back to claim his loot too. There was no honor amongst thieves, he guessed. On a lonesome semi with a flatbed, a truck drove off into the cresting sunrise. His cargo was leaves, trees, and compost. His haul listed to the side ever so slightly, sleeping. Well, looked like the Rat Pack got what was coming to it. Can't say I'm all that broken up. Live by the gun, die by the leaf monster.
Well, I'm going to mosey. Not y'all.